morning Year 10 or good afternoon whenever you are completing this lesson. Today we are looking specifically at the methods of training. So we're going to cover all 7 methods throughout this lesson. There will be hint questions in between the lessons, so that's down to you guys obviously just to go through those on your own and actually challenge yourselves. What I want us to do to start off with is just go through the memory platform. You've got 7 questions there and then you can go through those. Once you've got all of your answers down, then head to the next slide because that is where the answers are. The 3 things that I want you to walk away from this lesson knowing are the 7 different types of training. I want you to understand the appropriate training method used to improve a specific component of fitness, and lastly I want you to apply the knowledge to an exam question. Those exam questions you'll find on your Microsoft form as you did last week. The first thing that we need to know are the different methods of training. Methods of training simply means the different ways that we can train our bodies. We know that a swimmer would not train in the same way to what a long jumper would. So there's like a scale, and on this scale we've got all the 7 different methods of training that people may use. So on the left hand side of the scale you've got your aerobic activities or your aerobic methods of training, and on the right hand side you've got your anaerobic methods of training. The most aerobic the method of training that uses aerobic respiration most would be continuous training, then fartlek training, followed closely by circuit training. You've got fitness classes, I've put that in a red box, I'll explain that in a second. You've then got interval training, weight training, and lastly plyometric training. The reason I have put fitness classes into a red box is because this could be a whole range of different activities. If we think about fitness classes, I know that I love yoga, and that's not an anaerobic activity, whereas if I take a body pump class, which again I'm quite a fan of, body pump involves lots of weight training, so that would be an anaerobic method of training. So depending on the class that you go to will depend on whether it's aerobic or anaerobic. Continuous training is something that's designed to improve your cardiovascular fitness. It very simply, as it says on the tin, is training where you are not allowed to stop, so it has to be continuous. You are not allowed to have any rest breaks whatsoever while you are training continuously. You need to be working for around 20 minutes. If you are working for, let's say, 5 minutes, you go for a 5-minute run, that's not continuous training because you are not in your aerobic training zone for long enough. Whilst you are working aerobically, you are training continuously, you need to ensure that you are working within that aerobic threshold. So you should be working at between 60 and 80% of your maximum heart rate. We wouldn't want you to be going at 80 to 100% because you won't be able to last for the entirety of the training session. The examples of activities that you could do that would be continuous training would be cycling, running, swimming. Another example would be rowing as well. So our athletes that would be using continuous training would normally be athletes that have a high cardiovascular fitness. I've got some advantages and disadvantages of continuous training that I just want to run through very quickly. So firstly, continuous training is a great way to improve your aerobic fitness or your cardiovascular fitness. If you are an athlete that is doing an endurance event like a marathon, like a cycle, continuous training will be the #1 method of training for you to use. It's really good at reducing and lowering your body fat because you are working for a sustained period of time, therefore your body will need to go into its fat stores to produce energy. And lastly, you need a very small amount of equipment. I mean, if you wanted to start continuous training today, I can guarantee every single one of you has everything that you need. Pop on your trainers and go for a 20-minute run. Bam, you've just done continuous training. So some disadvantages of continuous training are that it can be very boring. One of the reasons that I hate running is because it's monotonous. It just repeats itself. It goes on and on and on. And secondly, it does not improve your speed or your agility. So if you are somebody that's, let's say, a football player, continuous training may not be the best method of training for you because it will only improve your cardiovascular fitness. As we know, that's not the only component of fitness that is needed for a football player. Interval training is when we train, then we have rests during that training session. So it normally has really, really intense explosive bursts of exercise, and then you have a rest. So the most important thing is that you ensure you have that rest or recovery period during your session. Some examples of interval training could be a 50-meter sprint followed by 30 seconds of rest, and that's then repeated 10 times. Now, we could do interval training with running, swimming, cycling, or we could do a rowing machine. And every time you do that whole pattern, that's called a rep. So if we were doing a 50-meter sprint and then resting for 30 seconds, the 50-meter sprint would be called a rep. And we could do that 10 times. That's called your sets. This is really, really good in terms of improving aerobic fitness for team sports if we increase the distance that the person is running. So let's say rather than sprinting for 50 meters, we made it like a 400-meter sprint. Then the performer had a 30-second rest and they did it again. We would be looking at improving aerobic fitness, but traditionally interval training would be used to improve speed. Interval training will be great for anybody that is participating in an in an invasion game. So your games like netball, like basketball, because we're looking at getting explosive bursts of energy, i.e. you're sprinting off the line, and then you're going to have that opportunity to rest during the game. So this is quite good for that reason. As we discussed earlier, two different athletes will use interval training slightly differently. So if we just look at our sprinter, we can see, I'm going to use purple just to go through this with you. We can see that they start off with a 10-minute warm-up. Once they've done that, they will do 10 sets of 50-meter sprints here. So that would mean that they are running a 50-meter sprint 10 times with 30 seconds rest. They're going to do that whole set 3 times. Then they have 5 minutes rest in between each set. The next athlete that we're going to look at would be our rugby player. If we take our rugby player, we can see the immediate difference is the distance that they would be running. So our rugby player, where they are an invasion games player and they would need to cover more distance while they are competing, they would be covering more like 400 metres just because it's more game realistic to them. We can see that they have a longer rest period in comparison to our sprinter. The reason for that is obviously they're going to be working slightly harder as they are covering a larger distance, but in their actual game they are more likely to have an increased amount of rest too. So we've got the same type of training here, or the same method of training, but we can see we've adapted it slightly depending on what each athlete will require. The advantages of interval training are that it is a great way for somebody to focus solely on speed. Remember, the way we focus solely on speed is by keeping a sprint and a very, very short recovery period. It can also be adapted to suit an individual or a sport. We saw already in that example that you could have an athlete, i.e. a sprinter, and we could have any type of games player. That type of training can just be modified so that it suits the athlete. In terms of our disadvantages, it can be quite difficult to see how hard a person is training. So I want you to think about a Key Stage 4 PE lesson that you guys have had. I'm going to pick specifically circuit training. It's very, very difficult for us as teachers sometimes to see how hard you are working. It's very much down to the individual to pick, oh, am I going to try on this one or am I not? And this is one of the problems with interval training, like circuit training. that it's down solely to the individual to make sure that they put the effort in. This leads on from the last point. The person needs to be motivated. There's no point in doing interval training if the person who's training is not going to push themselves hard. Fartlek training is the next method of training we are going to be going over. It's very often referred to as speed play because that's what Fartlek means in German. And it's a combination of different intensities, terrains and speeds. So an example of this will be doing a lap, like say over 400 metre track, doing it at 50%, then doing one lap walking, then doing another lap at 80%. So we can use our fartlek training to improve both our aerobic and our anaerobic fitness, because you can pick the intensity that the athlete is working at. I've got an example here of fartlek training for you. So we can see this athlete here is running 50 yards, he's running it. Next, when he gets to the cone, he sprints the 50 yards. He's going to be a bit worn out, so here, then he's going to walk 50 yards, and then here, we're going to jog 50 yards. So when we are looking at fartlek training, we can see there are a variety of different speeds here. I used to do athletics, for those of you that didn't know, and the worst training session ever was when my coach would go, right, Leah, we're doing 4-3-2-1s, 2-3-4s. That was absolute hell. That meant you sprint 400 metres, you walk 300 metres, you sprint 200 metres, you walk 100 metres. Then you sprint 200, walk 300, sprint 400. They were horrific. And they were horrific because it was such a high intensity for pretty much all of the session. Although you'd get those rest periods, I hated it. And I mean, we know now that I'm not a runner, so that was obviously part of why I hated it too. Before we move on, I just want to go into a little bit more detail about fartlek training. You can see that I've put on here that it's absolutely fantastic for games players, anybody doing those invasion games, as we have already mentioned. So anyone that's doing your football, basketball, netball, handball, rugby. The reason for this is because it actually emulates what a real life game would look like. So if I was playing a game of handball, I'm not going to be sprinting the whole time back and forth throughout the game. If my team are attacking and I'm a defender, I'm going to have an opportunity to pull back slightly, which would be me, i.e. walking in fartlek training. But then once my team are defending again, I may then need to sprint back into defence. So we can see this is fantastic for those invasion games players, as it literally replicates what happens in a real life game. Our advantages of fartlek training is that it's a really, really good training method for a games player, as we've just discussed, and that's because it has so many different changes of speed. We can adapt this to match any sport. So if we wanted it to be relevant to tennis, we could make it relevant to tennis. If we wanted it specific to basketball, we can make it specific to basketball. And the changes of pace continuously make it more interesting. It's not like continuous training where you're just going at one pace throughout. This keeps it quite engaging. So the disadvantages is that, again, it can be quite difficult to see how hard a person is working, and the person has to be motivated. Otherwise, when we get to the sprinting sections, the person could just go, oh, I don't really want to sprint, and then not do it. So it's really, really important that the individual understands why they are doing it and that they are motivated enough to complete that task, or that training session, should I say. Circuit training is probably the method of training that you guys are most familiar with, because I know I personally have done it with you in several PE lessons. So when we are doing circuit training, every single station or every single exercise is called a station. The way that the circuit will be set up is that every station will work a different body part. The reason for this is because we can avoid overworking particular muscle groups. We can improve almost any component of fitness using circuit training, but that it's most commonly used to improve cardiovascular fitness or muscular endurance. And because circuits can be so versatile, lots and lots of different athletes will use them. So I just want to show or highlight for you on this circuit. So we can see here we've got somebody that's doing a seated row. This is going to be working mostly the chest muscles. Here we've got somebody doing leg lifts. So we can see that they're going to be using their legs in terms of, they're doing leg lifts, which means that they are going to be using their abs. Here, this person's doing hamstring curls, so they're working their hamstrings. This person here is doing a leg press. This person here is doing a bicep curl. This person here, I think, is doing some sort of arm workout, and this person is working on their back muscles here. So going through these one by one, we can see that each muscle group is being hit at a station, but at no time do the two muscle groups get worked back to back. So we're not seeing two stations where one is squat jumps followed by squats, because you're going to be fatiguing the muscles, as we said earlier on in this bullet point here. I've created a really basic circuit so that I can just talk you through the way a circuit would be set up. So the first thing that you need to identify is the amount of stations that you are going to have. Here we've got 7 stations. The athlete or the person participating in this will work for 45 seconds at each station. They then get given 10 seconds at the end of that time to move on to the next station, and that is also included that is what we can also call as your rest time. We're going to do that whole circuit 3 times, okay? Sorry, I don't know why my mouse has just done that, but we're going to do that whole circuit 3 times. If we have a look at the 7 exercises here that have been picked, we can see that none of them work the same muscle group repeatedly, so we're not going to be fatiguing our large muscle groups. If we think specifically about this circuit, we are going to be working both our muscular endurance and our cardiovascular fitness. You guys already know one of the advantages, which is that circuit training can work more than one component of fitness at a time. We saw that in the last circuit that we just looked at. It's not expensive, and you can do it without any equipment at all. So when we do it at school, I'm sure you guys can think of some of the stations that require no equipment, like squat jumps or star jumps. You don't really need anything to participate or set up a circuit. It can be adjusted and it can be made specific to a sport. So let's say I wanted to do a netball circuit. I could do one station that was shooting, I could do another station that was passing against a wall, I could do another station that was footwork. So we can create different circuits that are sport specific. And finally, it's very quick and easy to set up. Our disadvantages, again, are that the athlete themselves needs to be motivated. As I said earlier on, I will be popping in a couple of hinge questions that I want you to go through. So firstly, which method of training involves working at different speeds? Is it interval training, fartlek training, or circuit training? Please write your answer now. I'll give you 5 seconds and then I'll put up my answer. Okay, so the correct answer is fartlek training. We know that because fartlek in German means speed play. Well done for those of you that got that right. Weight training or resistance training uses either weight or resistance machines. We can also use body weight as well, which just means you are using the weight of yourself in things like press-ups or squats. So weight training is really, really important because it can improve your muscular strength, your muscular endurance, your power, and it can also help you to recover after injury. So I want us to think a little bit more about increasing muscular strength. So if you are going to the gym and you're trying to increase muscular strength, you are going to be using very heavy weights, like you can see in my picture. You're going to be using really, really heavy weights, and you're going to be doing minimum reps. So if we're looking at improving muscular strength, we're going to be looking at completing things like a 1 rep max. A 1 rep max is you doing the heaviest weight that you can do, but you're only doing it one time. So an example would be, if we'll take this picture here, this athlete is doing a chest press. If he is trying to increase his muscular strength, he will do the heaviest press that he can do and only do it once. If we are looking at improving muscular endurance, so here, we would then do lots of repetitions with a low weight. If we are looking at using our resistance or weight training to increase power, we would then try to make our movements as explosive as possible. As we've already discussed, weight training is training that uses either weights or resistance machines. If we're thinking about improving our muscular strength, then ideally we want to have a high weight with low repetitions. So as we've mentioned earlier on, our 1 rep max. If we are trying to improve our muscular endurance, then we will go for low weight and high repetitions. The main advantages of weight training are that it strengthens a muscle group. We can make sure that that muscle group is targeted, i.e. we could do legs day or we could do chest day. It can be very, very easily adapted to suit different sports. So just because it's weight training as a whole, it does not mean that we will always be focusing on, let's say, improving strength. We could also put a different spin on that so that we are improving power. So it will be more suitable for somebody that's, let's say, a long jumper, high jumper. The disadvantages, if you would do it wrong, it can cause injury, and the equipment is quite expensive unless you are doing body weight. Plyometric training uses hopping, bounding and jumping. It is primarily used to improve both power, muscular strength, and it can also improve speed. The reason for this is because you are encouraging your muscles to contract and relax and contract again really, really quickly. So these explosive movements help to improve power, strength. Once you've started your plyometric training, it will normally take you about 8 to 10 weeks to start seeing gains, which isn't a massive amount of time. The slight problem with this is that there is a very, very high risk of injury because of the amount of stress and strain that you are putting on your muscles when you're asking them to contract and relax really, really quickly by doing things like bounding, hopping, skipping, jumping. It puts a lot of strain on the muscles. I will give you an example, and I'm more than happy for you to have a chat with her and find out about this. Myself and Miss Butts were doing plyometric training in the mornings about a year ago, and we did 2 sessions a week. And after week 3, Miss Butts pulled her hamstring from doing the sessions, and it's purely because it's put so much strain on the muscles. And as we were gradually increasing the intensity of the lessons, her body, it was just too much for her, and especially where she was doing football training as well. So when you are doing plyometric training, it's very, very important that you are making sure that you are not overtraining, because this is very, very easy to become injured. Our advantages of plyometric training are that it's very, very easy to set up. With that in mind, you also need very limited equipment, if any at all. It's really, really effective at developing power, so it's likely that your athletes, like your long jumpers, your high jumpers, discus throwers, any field event in athletics will use some type of plyometric training because we want that explosive, quick bursts of power. And it's really quick to see improvements. So like we said already, 8 weeks is a very quick time to see progress whilst training. Our disadvantages is that there is a very high likelihood of injury. If we are performing those movements wrong, you can get injured. Or in the instance of, like I said with Miss Butts, she had pretty good technique but was experiencing overtraining because of how much she was already doing. When you are doing plyometric training, you must ensure that you have long periods of rest and recovery. You cannot do plyometric training back to back, so you couldn't do a session on a Monday and a session on a Tuesday, and you also would need to have a sufficient amount of time before doing the next exercise. That's obviously within the same session. Next, I want us to go on to our hinge question. So, which of these describes what a repetition is? Is it a group of movements used in weight training, how many times per week you train, or one movement of an exercise during weight training? I'll give you 5 seconds to pick your answer. So the answer is it's one movement of an exercise in weight training. Example could be if you need to do 20 squats, each squat you do would be your repetition. I spoke about fitness classes at the beginning, and I said that our fitness classes are not as easy as sitting somewhere on the spectrum of aerobic training and anaerobic training. The reason for that is because there are so many different fitness classes. So when you go to a fitness class, most classes will be specific at working a particular component of fitness. So if you are participating in something like aerobics, there's lots and lots of high tempo exercises. They are designed to improve your heart and your lungs, so they will be working on your cardiovascular fitness. If any of you have ever seen step aerobics, it's like a low impact dance class. That's probably the best way to describe it. The second one would be body pump. I mentioned this earlier. This is my favourite fitness class. It's weight based and it targets different muscle groups, so it improves both your muscular strength and your muscular endurance. If you wanted to make it more specific to improving your muscular strength, what do you think you would need to do? If you guessed, or if you said you would need to increase the weight, you are correct. Some other fitness classes that we've got are Pilates or yoga, and these look specifically at developing your strength, flexibility and coordination. One of the components of fitness that has been left off there is balance. I know for me, yoga has massively improved my balance. Another one is spinning. Spinning is a muscular endurance or cardiovascular endurance based fitness class. You're on a resistance bike. I think some of you guys may have used them in our gym before. You can increase the resistance of the bike. When you increase the resistance, you're going to be you're going to be improving more of your muscular endurance. Whereas when you have a low resistance on the bike and you are cycling for a longer period of time, you will be working your cardiovascular system more. So a couple of fitness classes that I want you to get down are aerobics, body pump, Pilates or yoga, and spin class. We're going to go on to another hinge question before we finish. So to improve speed, which method of training would you do? Is it 1, weight training, 2, continuous training, or 3, interval training? I will give you 5 seconds. And the correct answer is 3, interval training. This question is slightly more challenging, and I want you to think about the intensity that the athlete will be working at for the duration of the training. So which training method would raise your athlete's heart more? Is it 1, continuous training, 2, interval training, or 3, your heart rate would raise the same for both activity? I'm going to give you 5 seconds to answer that question. And the correct answer is 2, interval training. The reason for that is because when we are looking at our continuous training, you are working between 60 and 80% of your maximum heart rate. So we're working aerobically, which means we are using oxygen, so we know that that activity is going to be low impact or low intensity. Interval training is what we can use to improve our speed. So we're going to be doing things like sprinting. If we are sprinting, we are working at 80 to 100% of our maximum heart rate. So we know that our heart would be working harder during interval training. Thank you very much for sitting through this lesson. I completely get this has been quite a long one, but that's because there are so many different methods of training, and I wanted to make sure that we get through those properly. What I now want you to do is follow the link on Show My Homework to access Microsoft Forms. If any of you do not know how to use Microsoft Forms, please do not ignore this message. Send me an email, leave a comment on Show My Homework so that I can support you so that you are accessing the work. The last thing that I want you to do is ignore this and go, okay, I'm not doing it. So please go onto Microsoft Forms, complete the questions, and good luck. Thank you very much for going through this lesson today, and enjoy the rest of your week.